London, in the early months of 1720, felt different. Not louder exactly, but tighter, as if the city itself were holding its breath. If you wandered into the cramped maze of lanes behind the Royal Exchange, you would feel it under your boots. A nervous energy hummed through the stone and timber, through the voices packed so closely together, they became a single roar. Exchange Alley had always been busy, but now it was feverish. Coffeehouses overflowed into the street. Men shouted figures instead of greetings. Fortunes were being imagined faster than they could be written down. The air was thick with sweat, smoke, and excitement. Merchants pressed against noblemen. Servants argued with lawyers. Silk sleeves brushed against filthy cuffs. Titles meant nothing here. Everyone had come for the same reason. A promise. A thin slip of paper that, they believed, could unlock riches beyond anything England had ever known. One word echoed endlessly through the crowd, passed from mouth to mouth like a spell. South Sea. Amid the noise stood a man who did not shout. He watched. His posture was rigid, his expression controlled, almost cold. He was instantly recognizable to anyone with even a passing education. The carefully composed face from engraved portraits. The sharp eyes of a man accustomed to solving problems others could barely comprehend. This was not a gambler or a speculator by nature. This was Sir Isaac Newton. Newton had spent his life imposing order on chaos. He had revealed the invisible forces that governed the planets. He had turned the movement of the heavens into equations. As master of the Royal Mint, he had brought discipline to England's currency. As president of the Royal Society, he stood at the pinnacle of European intellectual life. He believed deeply that the universe obeyed rules, and that those rules could be understood. What he did not yet understand was that human crowds follow laws of their own. To grasp how a man like Newton could be drawn into disaster, you have to understand the world that produced the South Sea Scheme. Early 18th century Britain was powerful, but fragile. The nation had spent years locked in brutal continental wars, particularly against France. Victory came at a price. Ships, soldiers, weapons and bribes had drained the treasury. By the end of the conflict, the government owed an unimaginable sum around £50 million. Servicing that debt consumed enormous portions of national income. Taxes were already stretched to the limit. Any increase risked unrest. Default was unthinkable. Without credit, Britain would be militarily and politically exposed. The government needed a solution that bordered on miraculous. That solution arrived not from philosophers or generals, but from financiers. At their center was John Blunt. He was not born into privilege. He had no ancient title or family estate. He was sharp, ambitious, and utterly pragmatic. Blunt understood something most men in power did not. Money was not about production alone. It was about belief. He proposed an audacious plan. A private company would absorb the national debt. Bondholders would swap government IOUs for shares. In return, the state would lower its interest payments. Everyone would breathe easier. But there was more. The company would be granted exclusive rights to trade with the Spanish territories of South America. To the public, those lands were half-mythical golden cities, endless silver, exotic goods flowing across the Atlantic. It sounded like a financial fairy tale, written just for a desperate nation. There was only one problem. Almost none of it was real. Spain controlled those colonies tightly. Britain had little access and less influence. The so-called monopoly existed largely on paper. The one genuine contract Britain held the right to supply enslaved Africans to Spanish America was limited and grim. One ship per year. Hardly the foundation for limitless wealth. The numbers never made sense. The profits could never justify the valuations being whispered in coffeehouses. But facts mattered less than stories. Blunt understood the power of suggestion. Rumors spread of secret treaties and hidden shipments. Pamphlets praised the company's prospects. Politicians spoke glowingly, often after receiving shares themselves. The public offering was a sensation. Prices climbed steadily. Confidence fed on itself. Newton observed carefully. At first, he participated cautiously. He bought early, watched the value rise, and then sold. The profit, several £1,000s, was substantial. He had acted rationally. He had followed the numbers. He was satisfied. Then the market refused to behave. Instead of correcting, prices surged higher. 200, 300, 4. There was no news to justify it. No flood of goods arriving at the docks. No dividends. Only enthusiasm. Newton saw acquaintances growing rich seemingly overnight. People he considered reckless, even foolish, were suddenly wealthy. The spectacle gnawed at him. The logic that had guided his first decision now worked against him emotionally. Being right too early felt indistinguishable from being wrong. By the summer, the city was unrecognizable. Speculation consumed every conversation. New subscription schemes made entry easier, cheaper, faster. People borrowed to invest. They sold possessions. They convinced themselves that prices could only rise. Even the crown was entangled. The king's name lent legitimacy. Parliament was compromised. This was no longer merely a market. It was a national obsession. Newton returned. This time, restraint vanished. He committed nearly everything. Savings, profits, safe government bonds, all converted into South Sea shares near the peak. He was not acting as a scientist now, but as a man overwhelmed by the fear of missing out. When prices falter briefly, he holds. When they fall again, he rationalizes. Surely, the government would intervene. Surely the system would not allow collapse. But markets do not care about reputation. Selling began quietly. Then suddenly, confidence cracked. Questions spread. Where were the ships? Where were the profits? The answers were devastatingly simple. They did not exist. Panic replaced greed with terrifying speed. Buyers vanished. Sellers flooded the market. Prices plunged. Newton watched helplessly as his fortune disintegrated. What followed was not merely a financial crash, but a reckoning. Ruin swept through all levels of society. Lives were destroyed. Anger turned toward those who had promoted the scheme. Investigations exposed corruption reaching into the highest offices of the state. Punishments were selective. Some men fell. Others were shielded. Power survived by sacrificing expendable figures. Newton received no such protection. He absorbed the loss in silence. The humiliation cut deeper than the money. He had been defeated not by ignorance, but by emotion. He never forgot it. Years later, he would summarize the lesson with brutal clarity. The movements of the stars could be calculated, but the behavior of crowds could not. This was not the end of the story, only the moment when illusion shattered. The aftermath would reshape British politics, freeze financial innovation for generations, and leave behind a warning that still echoes through every bubble since. And Isaac Newton, the man who explained the universe, would carry the knowledge that brilliance offers no immunity from human weakness. By the time autumn settled over London, the illusion had completely collapsed. The South Sea shares that once promised effortless prosperity now traded for a fraction of their former price. What had looked like a ladder to the heavens revealed itself as a trapdoor. Wealth had not vanished into thin air. It had simply moved. Those who sold early walked away enriched. Those who believed longest were left with nothing but paper and regret. The human cost was staggering. Families who had lived comfortably for generations found themselves ruined in a single season. Retirements disappeared. Dowries evaporated. Clerks who had imagined freedom returned to their desks with decades of work ahead of them. Estates were seized. Properties were auctioned. Pride was crushed alongside savings. London, once drunk on optimism, woke up sick and furious. Despair turned inward for some reports spread of men throwing themselves into the river rather than face creditors. Others lashed out. Carriages were attacked by mobs who assumed that any remaining wealth must be stolen. Coffee houses that once buzzed with speculation now echoed with bitterness. The mood of the city was no longer euphoric, it was volatile, and the anger had a target. The public realized that this was not merely bad luck or collective foolishness. They had been misled. The directors of the South Sea Company had assured confidence while quietly protecting themselves. Shares had been sold to insiders while ordinary investors were encouraged to buy. Loans were issued to inflate demand. Bribes had greased the machinery of government. This was not a failed experiment. It was a betrayal. Parliament could not ignore the outrage. An investigation was launched, not out of moral urgency, but necessity. The legitimacy of the state itself was at risk. If the truth came out unchecked, it could destabilize the monarchy. England had seen revolutions before. No one wanted another. Into this chaos stepped Robert Walpole. Walpole was not an idealist. He was not particularly inspiring. But he was practical, disciplined, and ruthlessly intelligent. He understood power, not as a matter of virtue, but of balance. His objective was simple: contain the damage, preserve order, protect the crown. Justice, if it came at all, would be carefully managed. The inquiry exposed enough wrongdoing to satisfy public fury, but not enough to threaten the foundations of government. The most visible figures were sacrificed. John Blunt, once celebrated as a financial savior, was stripped of his wealth and influence. He would never again command respect. Other directors were fined, disgraced, and ruined. Some fled. Some fell ill under the strain. One key witness died before he could testify. fueling rumors that the truth was deeper than anyone admitted. Yet the most powerful names were shielded. Connections linking the scheme to the royal household quietly disappeared from records. Evidence was buried. Responsibility was redirected downward. Walpole made himself indispensable by managing the fallout, not exposing it. In doing so, he consolidated unprecedented authority. Britain emerged with a new political reality, one where a single figure coordinated policy, controlled parliament, and buffered the monarchy from scandal. Without intending it, the South Sea disaster helped give birth to the modern role of Prime Minister. For the nation, recovery would be slow. For Isaac Newton, it would be deeply personal. The financial loss was immense, but the psychological damage was worse. Newton was accustomed to certainty. In science, errors could be corrected, experiments could be repeated. But the market offered no such mercy. It punished without explanation and moved on without apology. Newton had not merely miscalculated, he had misjudged himself. He became private about the episode, almost superstitious. The subject was unwelcome in his presence. Those who mentioned the South Sea affair noticed his mood darkened instantly. The man who once thrived on intellectual debate now avoided reminders of his own vulnerability. It was not embarrassment alone. It was disillusionment. He had learned something no equation could express. Intelligence does not eliminate temptation. It can even amplify it. Confidence in one's reasoning can become arrogance. Skepticism can erode when profit appears to validate belief. Newton had trusted that logic would shield him. Instead, it betrayed him at the moment he needed it most. This realization changed him. In his remaining years at the Royal Mint, Newton pursued counterfeiters with relentless intensity. Forgers were hunted, prosecuted, and executed. Some historians believe his obsession with monetary purity stemmed from the bubble's aftermath. He had seen how easily value could be fabricated, how belief could be weaponized. Where once he sought understanding, now he sought control. Yet time did what markets never do it. Stabilized. Newton remained respected, even revered. His scientific legacy was untouched by financial folly. When he died, he was honored as a giant of human thought, and buried among kings and poets. The loss he suffered remained quietly recorded, in estate documents, a silent reminder that genius does not grant immunity from error. The South Sea Company itself lingered on, hollowed out and transformed into a bureaucratic instrument for managing debt. It became a shadow of its former fantasy, surviving on paperwork rather than promise. A ghost ship drifting through the centuries, its golden dream long dissolved. What endured was the lesson. Bubbles are not accidents. They are human creations. They form when stories overpower skepticism, when momentum replaces meaning, when belief detaches from reality. They do not discriminate. They consume the foolish and the brilliant alike. And they always end the same way. Isaac Newton's downfall was not that he misunderstood finance. It was that, for a moment, he forgot human nature, including his own. Long after the panic faded and the crowds thinned from Exchange Alley, the deeper consequences of the South Sea disaster continued to ripple through Britain. Laws written in fear remained on the books. Innovation slowed. Trust in markets fractured. An entire generation grew cautious, haunted by the memory of how quickly paper fortunes had turned to ash. The nation recovered, but it did so with scars. And yet, the pattern did not end there. The mechanics of the bubble were not unique to 1720. Only the costumes changed. Again and again, across centuries, the same human instincts resurfaced. New technologies, new frontiers, new promises wrapped in unfamiliar language. Railways, electricity, automobiles, the internet, digital assets. Each era convinced itself it was witnessing something unprecedented, something immune to history. Each era believed it had finally outgrown the mistakes of the past, and each era was wrong. The South Sea bubble was not about ships or trade routes or Spanish colonies. It was about belief, about stories powerful enough to override caution, about the seductive idea that value can rise forever, simply because everyone agrees it should. The market did not deceive people. People deceived themselves, collectively, enthusiastically, and often proudly. Isaac Newton's experience cuts through the centuries because it strips away a comforting illusion that intelligence alone protects us. Newton was not reckless by nature. He was not ignorant. He understood risk. He entered cautiously and exited wisely. But the market did not test his knowledge, tested his emotions. When success continued without him, envy whispered louder than reason. When others prospered, discipline weakened. In the end, it was not stupidity that ruined him, but the very human desire to belong, to participate, to not be left behind. That is why his story endures. Markets are not governed by physics. They are governed by psychology. Prices do not reflect truth. They reflect consensus. And consensus can form around illusions just as easily as reality. When confidence rises, logic bends. When fear arrives, it snaps back violently. No equation can predict when that moment will come. Newton spent his life proving that the universe operates according to immutable laws. Gravity never panics. Planets do not chase trends. Light does not care about rumor or fashion. But money, unlike matter, responds to stories. It flows toward hope and flees from doubt. It amplifies emotion until it overwhelms reason. That is the paradox at the heart of modern finance. The South Sea bubble ended more than 300 years ago, but its lesson is unfinished. Somewhere, right now, a new promise is being sold. Somewhere, crowds are gathering. Somewhere, prices are rising without explanation. And somewhere, brilliant minds are telling themselves that this time is different. Isaac Newton would have recognized the feeling. He could measure the pull between worlds, but he could not measure the pull of greed. He could map the cosmos, but not the human heart. In that failure lies his greatest contribution, outside of signs or warning, written not in equations, but in lost. When markets soar, uncertainty feels universal. Remember the silence of the man standing in Exchange Alley. Remember that even the greatest genius in history mistook momentum for meaning. And remember that while the stars move with perfect predictability, crowds never do. The universe may obey laws. The market never will. Hey everyone, if you enjoyed this video and want to stay updated with more insights on finance, make sure to subscribe to my channel, Financial Coin. And don't forget to hit that bell icon so you never miss our latest videos.